important topic. Ronald Reagan perhaps put it best, and we say that a lot from this podium. He said, quote, "We must recognize that we live in an imperfect, often violent world, one in which ballistic missile technology is proliferating. Despite our efforts to prevent this, we would be doing a grave and dangerous disservice to future generations if we assumed that national leaders everywhere, for all time, will be both peaceful and rational." He said that at the 5-year anniversary of announcing the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, also known as Star Wars. The speech was visionary, and Reagan himself understood. He said the technology may not be accomplished by the end of this century. Others lambasted the idea as a waste of money and potentially even destabilizing to our nuclear doctrine. He did have one friend, however, the Heritage Foundation. A year before the speech, we had sponsored a missile defense study of our own called High Frontier, a new national strategy. Reagan famously walked away from Gorbachev at Reykjavik rather than to compromise on SDI. He knew we needed a way to protect our homeland. And thanks to his leadership and the hard work of many patriots over the years, we've made great progress. But more must be done, which is why we are hosting this event today. So let's get on with it, and let me introduce our first speaker. Deb Fischer is the senior senator from Nebraska and is a leader on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Born in Lincoln, she has deep roots in the state's agriculture community and has been a prominent voice for rural interests and also for national security. She is that leader on the committee. She serves as the chair of the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, which focuses on America's nuclear triad and associated delivery systems, the emergence of space as a warfighting domain, and defending the nation against increasingly sophisticated missile threats. The subcommittee directly oversees 2 unified combatant commands, the U.S. Strategic Command, headquartered at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, and the U.S. Space Command. Fisher's been a strong advocate for national defense, particularly missile defense systems. She's pledged that she's committed to ensuring we have strong missile defense system that will deter our adversaries and protect our people. Senator Fischer brings her experience as a rancher and a small business owner to bear every day representing the great state of Nebraska, and we're grateful that she's here with us today to talk about the importance of missile defense for our entire nation. Please welcome Senator Deb Fischer.
Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate the invitation to be with you today on this extremely important subject. Thank you for your interest. Today, we stand at an inflection point for homeland missile defense. Our adversaries are growing increasingly capable of attacking the United States homeland, developing sophisticated weapons designed to evade our legacy missile defense systems. Our legacy missile defenses work extraordinarily well for what they were designed to do, which is to intercept and destroy a limited ballistic missile attack from a non-peer adversary like North Korea or Iran. But the world has grown more complex in the past 20 years. Russia and China have dramatically increased and diversified their ability to attack the homeland through modernizing their conventional non-ballistic missile forces. We cannot allow an adversary to believe that they can cripple the United States or that they can deter us from engaging the world to defend ourselves, our interests, and our allies. A modern, robust missile defense architecture like the Golden Dome should make our adversaries doubt that such an attack would ever be successful. But if any nation decides to attack us, the Golden Dome will save American lives. And importantly, it will give our decision makers time to make the decisions. We saw this concept work to great success just last year when Iran launched hundreds of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and one-way attack drones at Israel. Their Iron Dome system intercepted and destroyed rockets, drones, and missiles, protecting the people of Israel. This meant that the government of Israel had maximum flexibility in determining how and when to respond to those attacks. As I said earlier, missile defense works. As chair of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, I've led the Armed Services Committee's NDAA provisions requiring the Department of Defense to develop a comprehensive, integrated architecture for defending the United States against all forms of missile attacks. But getting the department to move faster and commit the resources, that's been challenging under previous department leadership. Under the new administration, that has finally changed. In his joint address to Congress earlier this month, President Trump reinforced his commitment to the new Golden Dome missile defense shield. The Department of Defense, especially NORTHCOM, Commander General Geo, and Secretary Hegseth, is sprinting to deliver viable concepts to the White House before the end of this month. The Missile Defense Agency and Space Development Agency, they're soliciting all of industry's best ideas. I expect we're going to see a mix of existing technologies, radars and interceptors that we know work against advanced threats, but also novel technologies as well. In my view, the department should first focus on how to execute. What can we do within the next 2 to 3 years? How can we make the homeland safer by 2027? We must also prioritize increasing domain awareness. We cannot defend against what we cannot see coming. This means additional radars, both ground-based and space-based, with better processing power and seamless integration into the Homeland Missile Defense architecture. I also expect the department to give serious thought to less traditional missile defense solutions, especially as we look toward the longer term. This includes novel space-based systems and operationalizing directed energy. We are capable of designing, building, and actually developing technologies today that didn't exist when President Reagan first envisioned the Strategic Defense Initiative 45 years ago. It is time for us to seize this moment, and I'm confident our homeland will be safer 4 years from now. However, I would be remiss if I did not point out the crucial role of spectrum in the success of the Golden Dome. For us to defend against threats, we have to be able to track those threats. We have to be able to discriminate targets from the countermeasures, and we also have to be able to intercept those threats. If we want to successfully defend the United States, the Department of Defense must retain access to certain bands of spectrum, specifically the lower 3 band. If the department loses access to this band, then we cannot operate the radars and the seekers that underpin any missile defense architecture. And we cannot simply replicate these capabilities into other bands of spectrum. In fact, earlier this month, NORTHCOM Commander General Geo was clear that the Golden Dome project will not succeed if the Department of Defense is forced to vacate that lower 3 band of spectrum. Finally, the Golden Dome must provide comprehensive coverage. With the proliferation of cruise and hypersonic missiles, we cannot have those holes in domain awareness. China and Russia cannot believe that they can sneak around our radars, attack our cities, our military bases, or critical infrastructure without fear of getting intercepted by our defenses. We have the technology to respond and defend our nation from these threats. The question is whether we will harness it to prepare for what we know is on the horizon. Over the coming weeks and months, the Strategic Forces Subcommittee will be working with President Trump to ensure that we do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fischer. Thank you for your expertise and your passion to defend our country. That was a really helpful set of remarks. And now I get to introduce our second speaker, Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. Joined the Senate as part of the Bear Den class of 2014, a particularly large one, good one for Republicans. He's a Marine Corps Reserve veteran, retired now. He retired after 30 years of service just last year. Thank you for your service. Earlier in his career, he also served as an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. You know, I think you've mentioned this before too, Senator, but Billy Mitchell, father of the U.S. Air Force, called Alaska the most strategic place in the world. Senator Sullivan noted in a recent speech that the forces based in Alaska are closer to Korea, closer to Japan, closer to the Taiwan Strait than our forces based in Hawaii, than forces based in Australia. He continued by noting that just about any weapon to threaten the United States, quote, if they're coming to threaten Chicago or New York or Miami, they traverse over Alaska. That's just the geography. The senator's military background includes deployment to both Iraq and Afghanistan as a Marine Corps infantry officer and civil affairs officer. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, he has consistently championed increased military readiness and robust national defense capabilities. Alaskans appreciate his combination of military service, diplomatic experience, and legislative work, and we certainly appreciate hearing from him today on the importance of missile defense. Please welcome Senator Sullivan.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Derek, for that nice introduction. And I really want to begin by just thanking Heritage. This is a great report. I'm looking forward to digging into it. But when it comes to missile defense, as you mentioned, and it's great to be here with my good friend, Senator Fischer, who's such a great leader on so many of these issues. But Ambassador, your work, Bob Peters, everybody, Heritage has been focused on these issues for literally decades. And it's just great to see what you worked on during the Reagan administration is what we're all going to be working on during the Trump administration. It's great to have you kind of as our wingmen and women as we work on this next round of missile defense that I think is a really, really exciting period led by President Trump's leadership and vision. I always like to have handouts, so we got a couple handouts for you guys. This is the visual of my Iron Dome Act, and we're going to talk about that, kind of the visual of what that could look like. And then the provisions. This is a bill that Senator Kevin Cramer and I put forward, but we're actually looking forward for the next iteration of this bill, which will be retitled the Golden Dome Act. And we're really looking forward to getting more senators on it in a bipartisan way, because I think missile defense is actually truly a bipartisan issue. As I mentioned, President Trump has laid out a bold vision. I've had the opportunity to talk to him about it on a few occasions, to build the next generation of missile defense shields that protects our entire country. And it's a layered missile defense vision. It's what is actually laid out in the Heritage report. And we are really, really excited to be partnering with him, Secretary Hegseth, all our combatant commanders on this. Derek mentioned Alaska is the cornerstone of missile defense for America. All the ground-based missile interceptors protecting the whole country are based in Alaska, with the exception of 4 from Vandenberg Air Force Base. All the major If you look at the map there, all the major radar systems, including the recently developed long-range discrimination radar system at Clear Air Station. Now it's a Space Force station in interior Alaska. These are all the systems that track any incoming missiles, and as was already mentioned, pretty much anything coming over to hit our country will fly over Alaska, which is why we have all these systems there. The 49th Missile Defense Battalion, that's the Army unit that runs Fort Greely, where all the ground-based missile interceptors are. They have a great motto. It's kind of the modern-day Spartans. They call themselves the 300, protecting the 300 million, which is actually exactly accurate. That is what they do. We also have really great testing. Some of you know, out on Kodiak Island, we have a space-based testing center that is really, really important. Kodiak not only has the largest Coast Guard station in the country and the largest brown bears in the world. It is a place that has really, really great testing for missile defense. The Israelis, the IDF, were out in Kodiak about 3 years ago doing testing on the Arrow 3 and David Sling. And some of you may have seen a couple years ago, the IDF with Prime Minister Netanyahu did a big kind of video on all the great work that they were doing out in Kodiak. So we are proud of that in Alaska. The last big major legislation that passed the Senate was my bill in 2017, the Advancing America's Missile Defense Act of 2017. Pretty much that entire bill was put in the NDAA in 2017 and 2018. The reason that bill was important, and it goes to my earlier point, is that bill of mine, I think it had 20 Republican co-sponsors and 10 Democrat co-sponsors. So this is an area where Democrats and Republicans, I think, can come together, and that's what we're trying to do with my Iron Dome Act. If you look at the provisions of this, I won't go into all of it, but what we did in 2017 was we were kind of building up the forces and the missile defense capabilities in Alaska because, again, that's where most of the activity is. This bill, when you look at the provisions of the act and the schematic in terms of this map, what we're trying to do now is start the legislative process to kind of do a legislative marker on how we would envision a shield over the whole country. So this has missile defense capabilities, ground-based missile interceptors throughout the country, East Coast, West Coast, Aegis ashore in different parts of the country, including Hawaii, which is why I'm trying to get the 2 Hawaiian senators on board. They were on board my last bill. Significant early warning systems that go down in the southern part of our country, which is important. Space-based sensors and eventually interceptors if we have that technology, which we will, and I think we will. So it lays out a vision. We know it's going to change. We are kind of marking the legislative territory based on the president's executive order, President Trump's executive order, and the 2022 Missile Defense Review, which had some really good stuff in it. And as we're updating it, I guarantee you we're going to be stealing some ideas from Heritage as well. But I think the key issue here is that we need to do this. As Senator Fischer so ably laid out in her remarks, this is a threat that is facing us now, missile defense with regard to our adversaries. And it's not just the rogue countries that this missile defense is focused on. This is focused on the big ones, a shield. It protects us. It buys us time, as Senator Fischer mentioned. And we think the time is right. And I really appreciate President Trump's leadership on this. I've briefed him on this Iron Dome Act, the provisions of it, just about a month ago. And Secretary Hegseth and Mike Waltz. And we're going to continue to build on this. A lot of opportunity with our new emerging tech companies, but it's not going to be cheap. The provisions that we put forward just in the Iron Dome Act, if you look at the back, it's quite significant, close to $20 billion. We will be placing a significant amount of missile defense capabilities in the budget reconciliation bill. So we're going to get on this soon. And I think that's also important. This is not some kind of dream. We are legislating, we are appropriating, and we are getting on this. Is it going to be perfect? No. But we need to act now. We need to act now, and it's great having the leadership from President Trump on this. Let me end with one final comment I was mentioning to the Heritage team here. If you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at it, I chaired a readiness subcommittee hearing just a couple weeks ago with all the vice chiefs. So it was the 5 services, all the 4-star vice chiefs, very impressive group. And at the very end of the hearing, because I care about this topic deeply, I asked them, hey, President's got his EO, he's very focused on it. My Iron Dome Act has a lot of good stuff in there. The Missile Defense Review has a lot of important stuff in there. And I asked the question initially of the Vice Chairman of the Space Force, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And because when you just looked at that group of vice chiefs, they're all involved, right? Of course, Space Force, of course, Air Force, of course, the Navy, with Aegis ashore capabilities and other capabilities. But also, very importantly, a lot of people miss this, the Army. Patriots, ground-based missile interceptors are run by the Army. So I was really, really impressed with the Vice Chief of the Space Force, the way in which he answered the question. Because you could tell the military's getting on this. They are very, very, very focused on it. They are thinking about how to integrate it. He started the answer to my question, and the other vice chiefs jumped in saying, hey, we can do this. We can do this. And they weren't kind of hedging. They said it. We can do this. The key is going to be how we integrate our efforts through different services, through different DoD agencies, and that is going to be key. Because as you guys all know, I love our military, but boy, oh boy, it can be bureaucratic. It can be siloed. And I think one thing that will help us break through that is that you have the President of the United States and his national security team saying, this is a priority of mine. And with Senator Fischer and myself on the Armed Services Committee, I can tell you it's a priority of the Senate, too. And it's a priority of the military. Take a look at the answer. It's a long answer. Some of the other vice chiefs weighed in. But, you know, as I was mentioning before we came out here, sometimes in hearings on the Armed Services Committee, you'll ask a tough question, and you'll see that the target of the question doesn't really know what he's talking about, he or she. These vice chiefs knew what they were talking about, and you can tell that they're focused, you tell that they're motivated, and you can tell that they want to work together and make this happen, and that's what we're going to do. So we're off to a good start. Again, I want to thank Heritage. You guys have been on this topic for decades. Particularly, it was mentioned, hey, when people ridiculed this and ridiculed Reagan, don't ever bet against the United States of America. I think that's the final point. And if our Russian and Chinese adversaries are getting a little nervous about missile defense and the Golden Dome, my message is they should be, because we do have the capability. Now we have the leadership from the President of the United States on down, and we're going to work hard to make this happen. So with Heritage's help, we're going to advance this in a much more thoughtful and strategic way. So again, I want to thank everybody and thank Heritage and their team for being leaders on this topic and so many other topics, peace through strength, for decades. And on this one, we got everybody working on it, and it's a real serious effort that we're undertaking right now. And Senator Fischer and I are leading it in the U.S. Senate. Thanks again, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Peters. I'm the Senior Fellow for Strategic Deterrence here at the Heritage Foundation. And before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to say that when Golden Dome is built before the end of this decade, it'll be due to no small part to the efforts and vision and leadership of Senators Fischer and Sullivan. So thanks to you both for your leadership on these issues. Our next speaker he's a terrific guy. It's Marshall Billingsley. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he focuses on illicit finance and arms control. And when you look at his resume, it's just incredibly impressive. Before he came to the Hudson Institute, he was the special presidential envoy for arms control at the U.S. Department of State, holding the rank of ambassador. Before going to the State Department, Mr. Billingsley served as the Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, where he built international coalitions and led U.S. efforts to counter illicit terrorist financial activities around the globe. Earlier in his career, he served for more than 6 years as the Senior Professional Staff Member for National Security Affairs on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he served in numerous other positions within the U.S. government, including as the Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy and as the Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment at NATO. And relevant to today's discussion, he served on the 2023 Congressional Strategic Posture Commission, which supported stronger missile defenses for the United States. So with that, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Billingsley to the stage. Thanks so much. So, Ambassador, thank you for joining us here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
We've heard a lot of different systems discussed this morning. We've talked about ground-based interceptors, Aegis Ashore, Patriot systems. We've seen THAAD in the news. Can you just kind of walk us through what some of these different systems are so that we kind of have a baseline understanding for this discussion?
Sure. Let's start with the most limited capability and then expand out in terms of the ability of the system to intercept longer range and more sophisticated threats. So at the core of, at that point defense level, the U.S. Army maintains the Patriot system, which we've all heard about since Desert Storm era. But that system is incredibly capable. We've seen it used to incredible effect in protecting Saudi from Yemeni strikes, in helping defend Israel, and more recently in Ukraine, dealing with a variety of threats that the Russians are launching at the Ukrainians. The Army maintains, if memory serves, around 15 battalions. They have an inventory of around 1,200 of these missiles that can go out and intercept at about 19 miles up and 20 to 40 miles out, I guess, probably more than that actually. But that's the most basic. Then building on that, the Army also maintains the Theater High Altitude Air Defense System, THAAD, which is roughly double the range and capability, but we have very few of those systems. We have 7, soon to be 8, give or take. And there, you got some experts here who follow the numbers far more closely, so I stand to be corrected. But with just a limited number of capacity to move those systems around. We have one of the key radars is in South Korea. We apparently still have a system deployed in Israel. Then building on that, the United States Navy maintains the Aegis ballistic missile defense system, which is deployed on 50-plus naval vessels. And that system uses the Aegis radar, but then has the SM-3 missile, which is capable of exo-atmospheric intercept, so being able to hit things as they are outside of the Earth's atmosphere. And then finally, as Senator Sullivan mentioned, we have the ground-based interceptors, 4 in Vandenberg, 40 in Fort Greely, Alaska, with an additional 20 silos that have just been constructed, but no interceptors yet to go in them. And there's legislation that calls for the administration to move forward with an East Coast-based interceptor site as well. So those are some of the key building blocks that exist today, that are proven capable today, that will be integrated into this Golden Dome architecture.
So let's talk about Golden Dome. So you walked us through a number of different systems that exist today.
What is in President Trump's Golden Dome executive order that is different from what we've been fielding for, say, the past 20 years?
Well, I think the fundamental difference is his determination to move forward with deploying an effective shield for all of America. And again, we have the ability to do that. We have a whole lot of space-based capability that is far beyond the R&D stage that can and should be fielded. So we're in a position where the vision of providing a shield against, at a minimum in the early increments, limited strikes, but gradually over time, a shield that truly would be effective against even overwhelming numbers.
So not just, when you say limited, not just against some nascent missile power such as, say, North Korea or Iran, but more mature missile power such as China or Russia.
That's right. And that's essential given what we see both the Russians and Chinese doing and what we saw the Russians threatening a few years ago in Ukraine.
Right. And we heard earlier from Derek Morgan and Senator Sullivan that in some ways President Reagan tried this 40 years ago. And some say, well, he tried and failed. Why do you think you're going to succeed now, whereas we couldn't do it in 1986, 1987? How have things changed over the last 40 years that make this possible today that it wasn't in the 1980s?
A number of things have changed. If you start with the technology and the capabilities, the overhead, the space-based architecture that existed at the time was not fit for the kind of complete defense that was needed. That's completely different now. We've got a very capable space-based architecture that can be augmented with, as the senators mentioned, directed energy capabilities or kinetic intercept capabilities at space. The processing capability that was needed at the time to fuse all of these different data streams didn't exist.
Yeah.
So just basic evolution in microprocessors. But perhaps more importantly, what did not exist then was bipartisan support. President Reagan encountered nearly unanimous opposition from the Democrat Party. So you had the pro-Soviet senators like Ted Kennedy. You had the arms control devotees like Joe Biden, who were completely enamored of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, the 1972 ABM treaty, and they were determined to try to thwart President Reagan at every turn. That's fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
And one good indicator of that, as you mentioned, I was appointed by the chairman of the Armed Services Committee in the House to the Strategic Posture Commission, evenly split between 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats, and unanimous in every single recommendation. And one of our key recommendations is that we have to deploy the capability to defend the American people from limited coercive attack. And that was a unanimous verdict, including from a number of commissioners who are probably on the complete opposite end of the political spectrum from myself. But on this matter, we agreed.
So you talked about an overwhelming attack and a limited coercive attack. What, just for the layman, what do you mean when you say a limited coercive attack?
It goes hand in glove with the critical modernization of our nuclear deterrent. And so it will be somewhat situationally dependent, but we want an enemy such as Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping to understand that he cannot idly threaten a handful of missile strikes on the United States to deter us from a course of action. That if he's going to attack the United States, he will have to commit a substantial, and that in turn is intended to alter his calculus in terms of what we then will do in response. So it ups the ante substantially. And so that really, my hope is that should be the interim goal for Golden Dome. And then as swiftly as we possibly can, progress onwards to as robust a shield as we can. All the technological evolutions, though, have not been in our favor. We have to be very, very honest about that. The Chinese demonstration of a fractional orbital bombardment system is a very troubling development. The Russians, presumably with the Avangard hypersonic nuclear glide vehicle, have, I would assume, a similar capability. they also, as we have greatly improved our space architecture, they have aggressively pursued counter space capabilities across a myriad of domains. And so there, part of the evolution in Golden Dome will be resilience in that architecture and the ability to counter their counter space activities.
So we've talked about Patriot and THAAD systems as an underlayer. We've talked about a ground-based layer with the interceptors that are in Alaska and California. We're talking now about building a space-based layer of interceptors. How are these things mutually supportive, and why do we need 3 different layers?
Well, you need the layers because you need as many bites at the apple, so to speak, as you can get when you're talking about a nuclear warhead or nuclear warheads inbound on American cities. The best place to get these weapons is, of course, in the boost phase. And Heritage has long advocated for boost phase capabilities. In fact, I remember your predecessor, when I was on the Foreign Relations Committee staff, Baker Spring from the Heritage Foundation was one of the most active advocates for these kinds of Aegis-based capabilities. Obviously, with drone systems now, there are a variety of new options that can be explored, particularly when it comes to the Korean Peninsula and in geographies where we can get close to the launch sites if we know where the launch sites are. But once those missiles are airborne, where you can have the greatest odds of success is when they leave the atmosphere and their maneuverability is reduced. Now, the enemies are deploying countermeasures of a variety of decoys and other systems, and those are increasingly sophisticated. But I'm confident that the Department of Defense, the Missile Defense Agency, and others are working overtime on discrimination of what is the actual target versus what is the decoy. In the event that you can't stop it exoatmospherically and it begins to re-enter the atmosphere, then you're in a situation where you start throwing everything you have at it, because we are talking about an inbound nuclear warhead targeting presumably a U.S. city. So you need these layers. And as I indicated, inventory is an issue, right? We only have 400-ish of the Standard Missile 3s that the Aegis system uses. They can do an exoatmospheric intercept as well. Well proven that we use several of those to help defend the Israelis in the Iranian attack. But when you only have around 400 or so of those interceptors, hopefully we'll see the industrial throughput increase, and I know that certainly is planned. The GBIs, of course, is another. We've got 44 of these.
Right.
Sure would like to see those 20 silos filled at Fort Greely as soon as humanly possible.
Right. So our friends in the arms control community, soon after President Trump's Golden Dome executive order came out, said, well, leave aside the missile defense successes that we've seen in Ukraine and in Israel over the past couple years. But the fact of the matter is that we've never had a successful ballistic missile test, and this is simply throwing good money after bad.
That's complete garbage.
Okay.
That's absolute garbage. The Patriot's proven itself, THAAD has proven itself, the Aegis system has demonstrated repeatedly. The ground-based interceptors, in fairness, they've had about a 60% success rate, but they are going after the most complex and sophisticated of the threats, and the reason you test is to improve.
Okay. The other criticism that community makes is that having a missile defense architecture, and this is an argument that goes back to the 1980s, is destabilizing, and that what we have today with Russia and China is stable by relying on the threat of mutually assured destruction and America's own nuclear deterrence, that you don't need missile defenses, and missile defense ultimately, if successful, could actually be so destabilizing as to increase the risk for the American people.
That is a worn out worry that people have moved away from. And by the way, the Russians and Chinese never subscribed to that because they've been pursuing nuclear anti-missile systems aggressively. The Russians today have nuclear-tipped ABM interceptors surrounding Moscow, okay? They've given the S-500 system missile defense capabilities, and the Chinese are procuring that and pursuing their own capabilities. So it is simply not the case. Rather, what I would say is, and we're not in a stable situation with regard to either of those two countries. Vladimir Putin continues to violate the New START treaty. 60 to 70% of his nuclear arsenal isn't even constrained by that treaty. China is in a massive race to achieve parity. You've heard the president talk about this. We warned about this on the Posture Commission. I warned about this as the envoy, as President Trump's envoy in the previous administration for these matters. China will achieve nuclear parity with the United States and may in fact intend to surpass us. So the balance here, the equilibrium is reached when you take the ability to use those systems to menace us, to threaten us, to deter us from a course of action. Take that off the table. Restore deterrence.
Great. At this point, we're going to open up to Q&A from the audience as well as those who are viewing online. So we encourage you, if you have questions, to raise your hands. We'll hand out microphones. And as well for the viewers at home or in their offices, please, we encourage you to put in questions into the chat box and we'll review those questions as they come in. On your tables there, we've got a copy of the Heritage Missile Defense Review, and that's also accessible online. So at this point, welcome questions as we have them. Sir, right there.
Oh, thank you. My name is Jonas Wendel. I'm from the Embassy of Sweden. First of all, thank you for a very interesting and thought-provoking conversation. I guess as a newcomer to NATO, a strong transatlantic link is very important to Sweden. So I guess my question would be, to what extent would a Golden Dome influence U.S. commitment to future alliances, perhaps most importantly, the perceived need to continue to continued need of forward deployment of American troops in Europe especially? Thank you.
Well, first of all, welcome to NATO. Long overdue. When I was Assistant Secretary General back during the W. Bush administration, had the opportunity to travel to Stockholm to lobby unsuccessfully the government on NATO membership back then. Did get to fly the Gripen, by the way, phenomenal fighter plane. I would say two things in response to that. First is that the establishment of an effective Golden Dome preserves U.S. freedom of action. It puts us in a situation where, as I've mentioned, you're not going to be deterred by these coercive threats that the likes of Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev like to issue. Secondly, one of the things I didn't mention is that we've been gradually expanding the Aegis ashore capabilities, right? So there is an Aegis, basically the Aegis radar and interceptors that are now deployed in both Romania and Poland, if I remember correctly, as well as Hawaii. And so the natural evolution of this capability is to begin to network those distributed sites, such as the Aegis ashore systems, into the broader architecture. So those would be two examples of how I think this serves transatlantic unity and interests.
And if I may, I mean, sir, I'll give you an example. The reason why North Korea has built ICBMs is to be able to hold targets at risk in North America so that if there's a conflict in the Korean Peninsula, North Korea could threaten the United States homeland with nuclear strikes and say, you guys should stay out of this conflict. There's nothing to do with you. And if you don't, this war could come home to the American homeland. Now, an American president could say, well, geez, I don't know if this is worth it. But if he or she feels confident in missile defense's ability to intercept and destroy those ICBMs coming from North Korea or whomever the adversary is, then that president is more willing, I would offer, perhaps, to live up to extended deterrence commitments and stand by its allies and so forth. It gives the president more freedom of action to do what is in America's interest as well as the interests of its allies.
I mean, that's right. Look, if you go back as far as one of the first major Taiwan crises in the Clinton administration, the Chinese threatened via Chaz Friedman at the time, former Assistant Secretary of Defense, they said bluntly to him, you will not intervene because you care more about Los Angeles than you do Taipei. So it's in their thinking. And we just need to simply realize that that's their calculus, and we need to cause them to reconsider their theory of victory in those kinds of situations.
Great. Okay, next question, sir. I think we've got a microphone right here.
Thank you. It's better. It's a great honor to be participating in this such a great event. And I'm ROC Defense Corporation Attaché Colonel Kim. And during this event, you mentioned about North Korea a lot. It means that it's a real threat from the perspective of South Korea and at the same time the U.S. In this Golden Dome plan, I would like to know it should be allied with allies and partner nations to deter that kind of threat. So what is the idea how to interact with allies and partner nations in this Golden Dome plan? Thank you, sir.
I think there's a number of existing and opportunities to expand cooperation. With South Korea, I think it's appreciated that the government finally solved the boycotting of the base where THAAD was deployed. It would be nice to actually get the interceptors in there so that it's not just the radar system, because that then positions you to be further integrated into these networks. With Japan, we have a robust cooperation on hypersonic defenses that really should be intensified. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is perhaps where we are lagging behind in an unacceptable way is cruise missile defense. And as cruise missiles continue to grow in range capability, as hypersonic technologies evolve to the point of adopting cruise missile flying profiles, that is an area where we need to invest, and that will be, I think, a further area for cooperation with South Korea. Additionally, again, this is you can't separate collaboration on defenses from collaboration on offensive deterrent capabilities. And while I completely disagree with the undercurrent in South Korea about the idea of you needing your own nuclear weapons, if you read the Strategic Posture Commission report, we say unanimously that we need to introduce back into the Asia theater nuclear capabilities. So my personal view is that I would like to see a warhead storage area reestablished in South Korea as part of the burden sharing arrangements with your country.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Wilson?
So, from one of our online viewers, are American allies in Asia or Europe capable yet of building similar missile defense architectures, or will they need American assistance to include increased sharing of tech?
The answer is yes. So they are capable, and they are, especially in the case of Japan, for instance. But some of the underlying capabilities and the ability to fuse the broader sensor network that we have can only come from us. And so, we I think should, as a matter of both pragmatism and principle, support national missile defense capabilities and efforts. Not the least of which is we have American troops and American naval vessels stationed abroad in many of these countries, and they are targets too, right? It's not just Guam. It's also, fleet concentrations in Japan, for instance.
What I'd add to that, sir, is that as you're seeing now, the U.S. and South Korea and Japan sharing right-of-launch data.
Right.
When you see an adversary missile launch, the more nations that have these sensors, that have these radar systems, and so forth, the better chances you have at being able to intercept an adversary missile launch, whether it's right of launch or even left of launch. If you can get good left of launch data
Right.
that you can then fuse in that data stream,
Right.
the chances of successfully intercepting an adversary missile launch, whether the target is North America or Korea or Sweden or you name the target, goes up significantly.
That's right. And I think we saw tangible results from our demonstration to Kim Jong-un that we do have left of launch capability, and he ought to be very, very careful.
Absolutely. Other questions? I'll ask one. To those who say that we've spent $500 billion, and this was on a long Blue Skies thread on Friday afternoon, that we spent $530 billion in the last 4 decades on missile defenses. And this is simply a way to enrich American defense contractors, but not actually provide security.
First of all, I think that number is inflated, and they're probably adding all kinds of service acquisition efforts like the actual destroyers and cruisers that are part of the Aegis systems into those numbers to make it sound so
Astronomical.
So astronomical.
Yeah.
But first of all, we just protected, together with the state of Israel, we just protected the state of Israel from 180 ballistic cruise missile and UAV strikes with, I believe, not a single loss of Israeli life.
Correct.
I'd like to see these people, what is the price tag that you put on 5 million people in a city?
Yeah.
American citizens. How much, right? I mean, if our government has one responsibility above all else, it's the protection of the American people and their way of life.
That's right. And there is also the deterrent effect of, of having the ability to intercept these missiles and these capabilities.
And look, the technologies that have been developed as a result of SDI and subsequent programs have spun off in innumerable other ways for other benefits to the country.
Right, and you see that now with how the reduced cost of putting kilograms in orbit today is now it's, I don't want to say cheap, but it's manageable in a way that was not 5 years ago even. And I think that's really why Golden Dome is an opportunity today and that it was not 10, 20 years ago.
I mean, just look at how Elon deployed Starlink. The ability to establish or reestablish architectures, the ability to put payloads into orbit. This is another big difference between when President Reagan first articulated his vision to where we are today.
Right. So they've been able. Starlink has 6,000 satellites in orbit for a cost of $10 billion. Yeah. So, are there any final questions before we break? Okay. One more from online. Yep.
One more question from online. What needs to be done to restore the defense industrial base's ability to rapidly and effectively increase production of key missiles and interceptors?
We need far more STEM graduates. We need people in the vocational trades. We need tradesmen. We need welders. We need a fundamental overhaul of the acquisition process so that we can send a long-term signal to defense industry that we are going to not only buy, but buy at scale so that they are willing. I mean, these are, in many, many, many cases, these are publicly traded companies, and they have to justify the return on an investment in infrastructure. So sending that demand signal in a reliable way. And that also goes to the Congress, who sometimes helps and sometimes really hurts this process. So, continuing resolutions are not great. It's good to keep the government open, but a far more predictable acquisition and a far more predictable appropriation process, I should say, would also be very helpful.
And I think your first point there was just spot on, sir. In that if you care about well-paying jobs for Americans, whether you're an electrician or a metal bender or a welder, up to an engineer, to a PhD level physicist, to a staff accountant, this is a good program for the American people.
Yeah.
So,
but we have a critical shortage of welders in this country, which is why our shipbuilding program is struggling the way it is. Encouraging people into, get them out of underwater basket weaving and get them into welding.
Well, sir, it's about all the time we have. Thank you for coming. Thank all of you for joining us here today, and for those who are viewing online, thanks very much. I think this is going to be an important space over the coming months and years as we see the new bills coming up that the senators mentioned, and as the Department of Defense moves with purpose to build this system. And I think the time is right, and if we don't build it now, it's probably going to be another quarter century until we get another bite of this apple.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for your leadership on this issue, Robert, and for that of Heritage Foundation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.